You've probably seen a lot of the scary numbers about what's going on with bills right now. Well, I want to just dissect it and look at what we're actually facing, introducing a little bit of context, because it's important to get context here. And in some ways, it's certainly scary, but in other ways, there is a little bit of reassuring news somewhere along the way. We should start with this, shouldn't we? This is the price cap from Ofgem. This is going back to 2009. It's a weird thing, the price cap, isn't it? We didn't have anything like this before, but it's just kind of a measure of what the limit they want to be on the average bill. And right now, that's £1,971. There's no such thing, of course, as the average household, but that's what they see as being the kind of median household. And now we know that Ofgem, it's been speculated about for quite some time what the level was going to be. Some people thought, originally people thought it was only going to be about kind of £2,800. That was last time the OBR looked at this, the Office of Budget Responsibility. They said £2,800. In the event, it's up to over £3,500, £3,549. And bear in mind that when the OBR was talking about £2,800, they said that was going to cause the biggest squeeze on our disposable income that we had ever seen on record. Well, the fact that it's a lot bigger there, that's not the most encouraging sign. Neither is the fact that if you look at what's happening with futures markets right now, because what this is basically looking at is looking at wholesale prices, adding on a few other things like that, a slight margin for energy providers, but it's mostly wholesale prices. And you can look through futures markets at what people are trading the price of energy at. And if you look at it right now, we're talking about kind of crazy days pricing. We're talking about, the average bill being up at £5,000 in January, £6,000, over £6,000 actually, in April. And I mean, that is truly terrifying, but it might not happen. And, right now prices are incredibly high for a few idiosyncratic reasons. It's possible, Germany's trying to replenish all of their storage right now, as are many other European countries. That's pushing up prices a lot. So on the one hand, it may not be as bad as that. On the other hand, if, for instance, Russia were to stop all its gas coming into Europe, it could actually be worse than that, frankly, cards on the table. So that's kind of where we are right now. But like I said, it's worth just taking a step back and kind of looking at that contextually, looking at how that factors into what we're actually spending our money on. And we can do that, because there's quite good data on this, by looking at average weekly spending. So this is data from the ONS. I've just picked out 3 different income groups here. That's the lowest 10% of spenders there on the left-hand side. I'll get out of the way so you can see it. About £245 a week. There's a weekly spending. You've got the middle income there, £590 a week. Then the highest at £1,200 a week. Now, whether or not you spend that much a week, I don't know. But these are average numbers statistically collected from quite a big sample pool. And what you can do, which is interesting, is just look at the different slices and where they come from. So, for instance, income tax, national insurance makes up quite a big chunk, a very big chunk actually, of the highest income people, the highest spenders. For the middle incomes, less so. And for lowest incomes, people who aren't necessarily paying income taxes, it basically doesn't show up much at all. Or, for instance, look at transport. So that's quite a big thing. Cars, fares, that costs quite a lot. And just take note of the scale, the size of these slices as we go through. Food and drinks, another staple, really important. By the way, that's gone down so much in terms of how much we pay as a percentage. Food and drinks have become a lot cheaper recently, which is another unheld story. But energy, where we're heading, really, that's energy. I've made them red so you can see them. Just about see them. But what you might know is they are actually relatively small, aren't they, these slices? And so what I'm going to do is just kind of take each of these bars and I'll change them into proportions. So it's the same numbers, but we're just looking at a percentage. So what's the percentage of their spending for these different groups that's going on electricity and gas? And you can see for the lowest income group, the lowest income 10%, you're talking about, a bigger chunk. It's kind of getting towards 10% at the moment. I say at the moment. This is 2019-20. That was the latest figures that didn't get kind of messed around with by COVID. So 2019-20 is what we're looking at here, which raises the question, what does it look like now? And I've kind of calculated that. And here's where we are now. Look at those red bars. A little bit bigger. OK, so that's based on £1,971 of bills. What happens if we get, well, it's not if anymore. What happens when that increase that Ofgem's now announced kicks in October? Well, here's where those bars go. Look, you can see they're getting bigger every time. And the chunk that we're having to spend on energy gets bigger each time as well. However, there's a big proviso here. The government has stepped in. They've stepped in with quite a lot of money, especially for lower income groups. And if you look at what happens of those lower income, particularly with that kind of lower spending 10%, if you factor in the government's intervention, well, look, the bar gets a little bit smaller. Now, that's kind of, does show that it's not having no impact whatsoever, the government grants right now. Actually, they have quite a big impact for certain groups. However, that's still pretty big. Final point, though, I showed you a moment ago what happens, maybe in the future if those bills do go up to £5,000. Well, what would happen to these bars? In other words, what would happen to the red bit, the bit we spend our energy on, if we do go into that terrifying world next year? Well, look at the red bars. I find that, pretty startling, to be honest with you. You're talking, and that's after government intervention we've got right now. So that's after the grants we've got right now. For the lowest income groups, we're talking about 40% of spending. It's totally not just unprecedented, but it's almost unimaginable, because you've got to think about the rest of this bar is where all the rest of your spending is coming from. Food, shelter, everything else is in that little bit, well, that bit that's basically increasingly squeezed by energy. And bear in mind, all of those other costs in the blue bits are going up right now because food's getting more expensive, rent's getting more expensive, interest rates are going up too. Also taxes, by the way, as well, although we'll see what Liz Truss or indeed Rishi Sunak want to do about that. But nonetheless, you can see in context here, energy going from being a tiny slice, or a small slice rather, to a very big and quite terrifying slice. However, what we really need to do is work out how this compares with historical context. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that middle red slice and kind of throw it back through history, OK? So the higher this line is, I've turned it into a line chart, so we're going back through time. It's better to show it in a line chart. Anyway, the higher that is, the more we are spending as a chunk, as a proportion of our total spending on energy. So that's energy going back to the 1950s. This is 1957, this starts. And what you can probably make out is, over this period, it's been constrained around that range between 6% and about kind of 4%, 3%. And what you might also make out is, look, more recently, in the 90s and the 2000s, actually energy was pretty cheap compared with certainly where it was now, but also compared with where it was before. But here's what happens next, OK? Look at what happens when this latest increase kicks in October. Look at that bar. Look at that. Up to the highest level on record. Now, quick proviso, an important proviso, I haven't yet factored in the government intervention. So when you factor in the government grants that are going to come to households around the country, £400 for everyone, but also more for those on means-tested benefits, that goes down, OK? So the bar is still going up, and it's still actually the highest it's been since the 1950s, but nonetheless, it is lower than it would have been otherwise. However, if you do have those increases we were talking about, the scary increases next year that might not happen, but who knows, just look. Up to the highest level. I mean, it's just totally unprecedented. And this is back to the 1950s. It includes the 50s, it includes the 1970s and all those energy price shocks, slightly different things. But nonetheless, when people talk about unprecedented, this is, the chart that's worth just bearing in mind, which of course raises the final question. What next? What's the government or indeed anyone going to do about this? And if we can have a look, as I mentioned, they have done something. They've spent about £30 billion on those grants, which will, as I showed you, make quite a big difference with at least this next increase. If it may not necessarily mean it's not the highest we've ever had, but it helps. That cost £30 billion, which, to put it into context, here's furlough. That's the furlough scheme, about £50 billion a year. What would it cost if you wanted to freeze the bills where they are now? When I say now, I mean at that 1,971, so before October. Freeze them now. Here's how much it would cost if bills were supposed to go up to what they're going up to in October. In other words, if the kind of levels stay around that off-gem level of 3,400, whatever it was. Look, about £42 billion. It costs a lot of money. It will cost a lot of money to freeze bills based on where they are heading in the next few months. About £42 billion. What if those forecasts or projections are right and the bills are going to go up potentially to £5,600? What would it cost for the government to freeze bills? Have a look at these bars. Have a look at the red bar. That's going up above furlough there. And if they get up to above £6,000, you are talking about £120 billion, maybe £130 billion of government spending, bringing the national debt up to potentially well over 100% of GDP. you know, it's crazy territory and it's scary territory. So I'm afraid, you know, there's not all that much good news. There was a bit of good news, but for the most part, you know, I'm just taken by how consequential this will be for all of us, but also potentially for the public finances as well. So that's where we are right now. We'll bring more to you as we get it, and more analysis, of course, all on Sky News, on our website and here on YouTube as well.